Hello everybody, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. I'm glad to be here doing this webinar for you. And this is part of a webinar series on strategic sourcing done by ISM India and hosted by BCube Global Solutions as well. And this is number 2 of the webinar series. We will be focusing on spend analysis this time. The last time round we talked about a high-level overview of strategic sourcing and what the various steps in strategic sourcing. Now we will be looking at spend analysis in detail. So here's a quick look at the agenda for today. We will do a bit of introduction. I see some of you that attended the previous webinar are also here, but so this might be redundant for you. But I'll talk a little bit about myself, my experience, and we'll also talk about spend analysis. We will then look at the various types of spend, sources of data, and spend categories and subcategories in spend management. Moving on, we will look at spend analysis, the process, the sequential step-by-step process on how to do a comprehensive spend analysis. And we will also then look at some basic types of analyses that I have done in the past. And when you look at types of analysis, it's an ocean. The possibilities are limitless, but we will look at a few basic, constantly reoccurring templates of spend analysis. We will then look at the various tools and technology used in spend analysis. We will talk a little bit about the various tools, about the approach towards using technology in spend analysis, and some challenges that you face while you use tools. Before we close, I will then quickly summarize, spend 2-3 minutes summarizing all that we discussed today, and it will then be followed by a question and answer session. So to ask a question, you can either type your questions in or you can raise your hand. You will all be muted until the duration of the presentation, but you will be unmuted if you have a question towards the end. So the way it works is the first 45 minutes will be the presentation. We will save about 15 minutes or perhaps even more for a question and answer session. So I hope you have a clear picture of what is in front of you and how we're going to spend the next hour. So why don't we get started? Introduction wise, some of you may already know this, but I'm an experienced professional in procurement and supply management. I've worked in a couple of countries, India as well as in the US. I have experience working with companies and vendors across the globe in North America, Asia, and Europe. And I have an MBA degree from Purdue University in the US, and then worked with Terex, an earth equipment manufacturer. At Terex, I've done multiple roles managing over 100 million of global spend across multiple categories. I worked in transportation sourcing while deploying a third-party logistics provider. I also have experience with implementing lean manufacturing system, understanding the various roles of purchasing and Kanban loops, and so on. As far as training goes, I have trained peers that worked at my company and otherwise on ERP implementation and lean manufacturing. There are several seminars on negotiation leadership within Terex, and also I'm CPSM certified. CPSM is Certified Professional in Supply Management, the most valued degree for procurement professionals, and I encourage all of you to get in touch with us if you need CPSM certification because ISM India offers this certification. I'm also the director of ISM India's Chennai chapter, and I have a small consulting company based in Chennai. It's called B-Cube Solutions. You can see the logo on top, right? And we focus on procurement and procurement consulting. We have both services and consulting. Moving on, let's take a look at the basics of spend analysis. What is spend analysis? Spend analysis is defined as the process of collecting, cleansing, classifying, and analyzing your spend data or what you expense with the purpose of, number one, reducing your procurement cost, number two, improving efficiency, and number three, monitoring compliance. And spend analysis is the backbone of strategic sourcing. Hold on, experiencing some. I hope you're able to see my screen. Hold on a second. Yes. So spend analysis is the backbone behind strategic sourcing. It is the first step that you need to do in order to run an efficient supply management function in your company. In the East, they talk about understanding oneself. All these yogis and all these people in meditation, they talk about understanding oneself before going out and trying to understand the world. This is something very similar. With spend analysis, you understand more about your organization, understand where you spend on, who you spend on, and how you spend. Once you have the data, you will be able to much better focus your efforts and initiatives on understanding the rest of the competition and so on. So broadly there are three types of spend. One is called direct spend, the other indirect, and one that we are seeing lately is tail spend. So what is direct spend? So direct spend is something that you spend on when you spend on goods and materials that directly influence the product and service that your company is making and selling. For example, if you're a manufacturing company that makes cars, all your tires and wheels and steering columns and engines that go on the car is what you would call direct material. Extending the same concept for a car manufacturer, what will be indirect spend? Indirect spend is something that enables your primary activity. So it can be spent on goods and services. For example, travel expenditure for all your employees. Spend on information technology tools, capital goods and consumables. All these do not go directly on your product, but however, they have an indirect relationship. The stronger these are, the better your ultimate material will be. So these are called enabling spend, and they also are pretty significant. If you were to look at the percentage, for organizations mostly, their total annual spend, based on their industry of course, it can be anywhere from 50% to 80%. So an organization can spend 50 to 80% of their total revenue on cost. And if you look at the distinction between, excuse me a second. Excuse me a second. Arun, I received a message from the window asking about colors and color setup. I still hope this is fine. The screen is fine, correct? Please quickly say if it's okay. All right, I think it should be okay. Now, if you look at the distinction with direct and indirect spend, typically, again, this depends on industries, but direct material spend typically accounts for about 80% approximately of a company's total spend. And over the last few years, tail spend has increased in its significance. Everybody is talking about managing tail spend. What is tail spend? Tail spend is nothing but the bottom 10% of your indirect spend. So if you look at indirect spend, it typically involves travel, IT, MRO, utilities. And once you get down to the bottom, you have millions of line items that you will purchase. Once you get to the bottom, this is you're scratching the bottom 10% of your indirect spend. This is typically, there's multiple thousands and thousands of items that are purchased at a very low cost. And it makes no sense for companies to focus on this because it's very exhaustive and resource intensive. It's pretty exhaustive. So what is tail spend? One-off purchases that fall below a certain threshold, and sometimes purchasing that is done at the plant level by other departments. Arun, I'm hearing some background noise. Can we mute everybody, please? Yeah. So tail spend is the bottom 10% of your indirect spend. So once we have this broad distinction figured out, we'll move on. We will talk then about sources of data. For you, in order to pursue a strong spend management program, you have to focus on your accounts payable data. Why predominantly spend analysis experts use accounts payable data is because the integrity of the data cannot be questioned, because you use your accounts data to make payments to your vendors, and hence the inherent assumption is that you will only pay what is necessary. So this accounts payable data accounts for close to 95% of the source of your spend analysis. There are other sources as well. If you want to get a clear understanding of various spend, you still have to look at alternate sources of data, and this can be either internal or external. Internal data can be invoices or scanned PDFs or data from your human resources, while external data can be from your supplier and also data in the public domain. So a combination of both these data sources will help you get closer to 100. But keep in mind that accounts payable data is still predominantly will get you to at least 95% of your total spend understanding. Now you have an idea on what the different types of spends are. You have your sources listed. What is next? So what are all the types of data that you need to have in order to perform spend analysis? Now I have separated data fields into two categories. One is must-haves and the other is nice-to-haves. So on the left, these are absolute essentials for you in order to perform a comprehensive spend analysis program. And on the right, you have things that aren't quite necessary, but if you have them, that will be great. You will get real accurate, you'll have a much stronger spend analysis program that will lead to better results. I'll quickly go down the list, and these are all something that you will be used to. Fields that you must have in order to perform spend analysis is invoice ID, issue date of invoice, PO number, PO date, item code, description, commodity, business unit division or the cost center, name of the supplier, unique code supplier. If there is a supplier-parent relationship, if it's a supplier is part of a group of suppliers, it is important that you have the parent supplier name as well. City or address of the supplier, number of items supplied, unit of measure, price, unit price, currency, and invoice amount. Now, these are all absolute must-haves for you in order for you to perform spend analysis. What will be nice to have is these are all extensions of spend analysis that you can perform, and there is still a lot to save using these extensions. So once you have contract numbers, expiry dates, payment terms for the contracts, Incoterms, UNSPSC codes, subcategories, delivery locations, cost centers, GL account settings, and the payment date. Once we are armed with all these fields of data, once we have data sources, what is next? You will have to categorize your data into multiple categories and subcategories in order to look at it efficiently. If you look at, it's easier for you to look at individual buckets than for you to look at an ocean. So one of the main initiatives in categorization, predominantly procurement professionals across the world use what is UNSPSC code, and it's the United Nations Standard Products and Services Code. It's an open global multi-sector standard for accurate classification of products and services. As I mentioned earlier, this is the most commonly used categorization across the world, and it's the other benefit is that if you use the same categorization as most other people across the world, there will be no misunderstanding in terms of categorization. Every supplier or every industry will fall under a certain category, and there will be no gray area. The other key feature is that it's free for everyone, and it's open standard. So it's constantly being updated as well. And there are over 20,000 categories across 5-level hierarchy. So you can move up or move down in order with 5-level hierarchies. And here's a fun fact for you. The UNSPSC is actually managed by the United Nations Development Program, and I'm not sure how many of you know Mr. Krishan Batra. He's the President and CEO of ISM India. He was the champion of this UNSPSC code set. So while he worked in the past at UNDP, and he led the initiative to have the UNSPSC, a common framework for procurement professionals across the world. So most procurement professionals have to be thankful to Krishan for leading and championing this, and it's fantastic that we have this code set. There are other code sets as well. In North America, predominantly people use NAICS as well as FSC, while in India, NIC is a popular code set. So these helps in categorizing your spend into little buckets and sub-buckets, so you will be able to look at them in isolation and make better decisions. Next, we will take a look at spend analysis, the benefits of spend analysis, and the step-by-step process in spend analysis. The single most, and it's pretty apparent, spend analysis helps in lowering the overall costs in your system. It helps in removing excess costs from your system. But what is also important is that I'll go from the left top and go in a circle. So spend analysis helps you have greater visibility over your spending. So you can track every single dollar or every single rupee that you can spend across multiple categories. For example, if you would like to know what you spent in 2009 in a particular category with a particular vendor, spend analysis will help present that data to you. You can improve relationships, 360-degree relationships, because you can, once you understand yourself better, you can improve your relationship with your suppliers, your customers, as well as the internal stakeholders. While the next step is, it leads to better decision making. While it's critics can still argue between making gut-based decisions, going with your gut feel. But I would always recommend fact-based decisions. Being an engineer, I think everything, if it's based on logic and fact, I would certainly agree with it. So with spend analysis, you can make fact-based decisions with data available at your fingertips. You can also focus on your key deliverables. So spend analysis will help elevate those areas that are more critical to your organization than some of those that are not. So you can focus more on your key deliverables rather than spending equal amount of time on multiple things. And last but not the least, spend analysis will help identify several areas of opportunity. So when you track your historical spending and you slice and dice your data in various fashions, you will be able to identify certain categories or subcategories that are lagging behind. So immediately this will lead to sourcing events. So all these combined with the lower overall costs make spend analysis a critical component of strategic sourcing. So once we're sold on the benefit, so how do we do spend analysis? This is the process. As I mentioned earlier, accounts payable data is typically the single largest source of your data for spend analysis. And if you look at the funnel, it flows from top to bottom. So if you use an ERP system, you use SAP, Oracle, or anything, you then take the spend data and you move it to a custom. This is how we do it at BQ. There are tools and technologies that also do it, so the web interface will be eliminated in such a scenario. So typically, you take the data from the ERP system, you move it to a custom web interface, and then ultimately you get it into a CSV format data which you can play around with. Even on a tool or spend analysis tools that you have, all this is done in the background. So once you automate this step, you will then have the next step, which is extracting, cleansing, and enriching. So what is data extraction? The spend data from your ERP system will contain multiple fields. You'll have to map those fields to your required. We earlier talked about the must-haves and the nice-to-haves data points. So you should be able to map the fields from your ERP into those fields that you require, and you have to validate to ensure that the data is correct. Sometimes even with a straightforward mapping, data can be misplaced in different columns. So there are tools that automate this, there are algorithms that do this as well, but it's also important that you do manual validation for data availability under the correct headers and general ledger accounts. Another important aspect of enriching the data is supplier normalization. And this is where most organizations struggle with. I'll give you an example. So I've listed HCL Bombay, HCL Mumbai, HCL BOM, Hindustan Computers Limited. So all these 4 names of suppliers is how it will be listed in your AP data. So it's easy to create a supplier name even though you use the same supplier ID, but still this will lead to multiple redundancies in your supplier data. So all these will be items or computers purchased from the same supplier, but still they will come to you as items purchased from 4 separate suppliers. So there has to be some amount of normalization done in order to consolidate all these 4 into one single supplier to make sure your spend analysis is done efficiently. And it's important, this step is particularly important because a system is only as good as the data it uses. I mean, if you have a right system and you use the wrong data, it will lead to bad decisions. I'd rather have perfect data and maybe an okay logical reasoning process. So, but still, the quality of data is most important. So once you have automated the input from your system into a tool, and then you've extracted, cleansed, and enriched your data, what next? So this is when you use the UNSPSC code set to classify it into multiple categories. And sometimes the UNSPSC code set has some areas that it can improve on. So based on the industry and based on your particular needs, you can create additional categories, but you have to ensure that the rules are correct. So create additional categories and subcategories, but make sure your spend naturally flows into various buckets. And the ultimate aspect of spend analysis is, if spend analysis were to only present data to you in various formats, I don't think it has done its job. What you should derive from data is insight that leads to decisions. For example, one is, I've included one at the top of the screen. You'll see bubbles. So this is a supply-based rationalizations dashboard that we have at BCube. What it does is that it presents to you information about a particular category wherein there is a certain cost of interacting with the supplier. So there is a cost when you go out and you interact with the supplier and you onboard a supplier. There is a cost of interaction and managing one supplier. So if you have multiple suppliers, that is not necessarily a good thing. So what supply-based rationalization does is that it compares your spending across multiple categories with the number of suppliers across each category. So I'll repeat that just so I'm clear. Supply-based rationalization, what it does is it compares the spending across various categories and subcategories, and it tells you the number of suppliers and the size of spending. So for example, for a particular category, you might be spending $10 million, but you will still have only 10 suppliers in that category. In certain other categories, you might be spending $5 million, but you'll have 50 suppliers. So there is obviously a mismatch, because you would not necessarily need 50 suppliers to supply 5 million within the same category. There is an opportunity to consolidate your spend and move more business to a particular supplier than spread it across multiple supply base. So spend analysis will help you identify all those opportunities. So I talked about supply-based rationalization, correct? So there are other templates that we have in spend analysis, and this is not just what I'm showing you is all that stuff that we have done in the past, and these possibilities are limitless. There are a lot more that you can do with spend than what I'm going to show you. But the important thing is, what is the ultimate answer you're looking for? Spend analysis should help you answer the 3 questions. For who are we buying? From who are we buying? And what are we buying? So if you take a look at, this is what we call a spend cube. This is also a popular term in spend analysis. You have a huge amount of data, but you should be able to use the data to answer these 3 questions: from who, for who, and what. And this is what will lead you to your spend cube. From who translates into your vendor, for who is your cost center, and what is your category. So the spend cube should help you slice and dice your data across these three dimensions, time being the 4th dimension. So you can have tens of years of data across this. So the spend cube is what you should ultimately get into. These are some common types of analysis that we've done, and like I said earlier, you shouldn't limit yourself to these types of analysis and spend. So cost per unit weight, where you have similar parts, and then the assumption is that these parts are similar, and so their cost per unit weight should also be similar. So you might be spending a lot more on a particular part that has a similar cost per unit weight than relative parts. There is also the part price history analysis, which is quite an interesting one. You track the trend of a part's price over years and try to match it with external situations. So it will help identify what drives your cost, what drives the cost of the part, as well as trying to negotiate down unjustified price increases in the past. Another analysis is pricing brackets, or EOQ, estimated order quantity. This is especially true if there is when you buy in a bigger quantity, you get a bigger discount from your supplier. So this analysis helps you identify the right number, the right order quantity for you to maximize savings. Indexed pricing analysis helps you identify the relationship between your part and a material index or an index that is published globally. This will help track, price. This will help understand how cost increases or cost decreases in your particular part or the category that you're buying, and you'll be able to be more proactive in identifying cost increases and decreases. Currency opportunity analysis is for companies that buy from suppliers that are that operate in a different currency, so you can hedge your currency and try to see which makes sense if you buy in dollars or rupees or euros or whatnot. The next type of analysis is freight analysis, which predominantly looks at your freight costs. VAT, if you're buying from suppliers that have VAT. So typically, when I was working in the US, we bought a lot of steel from China, fabricated steel from China, and China had a requirement that there should be a 45-day window between when you buy and you get product delivered. So you will have access to a particular discount if it's within this 45 days, if the lead time is within 45 days. So we spend a lot of time in getting our supplier to fall below this 45-day threshold so that we could use the VAT discount. Another area that has yielded a lot of results is warranty cost recovery. So the defects are common in our profession, but what happens is that when you reject a part, you may be due some warranty cost recovery. And companies typically don't focus on warranty cost, recovering this warranty cost, because they are focusing more on keeping their plant running and keeping their operations moving forward. So they do not look at recovering this warranty cost. Payment terms analysis is also another one. It talks about the cost of money, trying to understand if you can extend payment terms or you can reduce payment terms in certain times in order to lower the total cost across the entire supply chain. Part family analysis is another one, and there is another important one that is not mentioned here. It's the unit cost. It's very popular in especially the Japanese firms, the Hondas and Toyotas and so on. What the unit cost is, it's the rolled up bill of material cost, a rolled up BOM cost, that instead of saying, procurement professionals are often judged by, I saved 10% in this particular category for this particular year. What the unit cost does is that it rolls up the cost of an entire, so let's say you're a company that manufactures, let's say you're Hyundai, and Hyundai makes multiple cars. So with the unit cost, you roll up the BOM cost of, let's say the Hyundai Santro and the Hyundai Verna, and you track it with time. So on a monthly basis, this will be a better way to explain how you achieve savings. If you roll up the BOM cost of all the parts that go into making the Verna, that go into make the Santro, you will see how month on month and year on year the cost either goes down or it goes up. So this is the ultimate justification of procurement professionals' spend savings. And once you perform spend analysis, what is a logical extension? You have access to your accounts payable data, you have multiple categories. A logical extension, and this requires a lot of additional effort, is compliance and savings tracking. So these are two areas that are also logical extensions that companies seldom do. So contract compliance is trying to match. So you have your accounts payable data and you have your repository of contracts, and what you can do is try to identify contract compliance percentage across your multiple categories to ensure that your contracts are being adhered to, and you minimize maverick spending. Maverick spending is something that sometimes in ultimate times of distress, companies just buy items without a particular PO or without an item tied to a contract. So spend analysis helps reduce maverick spending and increase contract compliance. Another extension is the savings tracking. I already talked about the unit cost analysis, but what the savings tracking does is that most procurement functions are given a particular target for a year, fiscal year. So what the savings tracking does is that it maintains a list of all the projects that were introduced by the procurement organization. Since you have access to your AP data, you identify the savings that are actually generated. So one is the annualized. It's important to understand the difference between annualized savings and cash flow savings. Annualized savings are at the end of a sourcing event, you say, your estimated annual purchase of a particular line item is, let's say, I'll do a quick math, okay, so bear with me. So you buy 1,000 items at $10. So that will 1,000 items throughout the year at $10 a piece. So the total spent on that particular item is $10,000. Now you do a sourcing event and you manage to negotiate it down to $8. So now your annualized savings, your total spend on that is 8 into 1,000, which is $8,000, and your annualized savings is $2,000. But then again, if you go to your the finance team and say, hey, I managed to save $2,000 this year, this might not necessarily be true, because the savings are only good when you actually place a PO with the new price. So you might still have 200 parts at the old price that you bought still in inventory. You'll have to run them down before we get to the new cost. So that is when real savings, that is when cash flow savings happen. So there can be an obvious disconnect between annualized and cash flow savings, and with access to your accounts payable data and your contracts and your sourcing projects, you should be able to identify and trend this forward. So this will especially help the finance and the budgeting organization to identify future cash flows. We've talked about the various aspects of spend. What we will then finally look at is some of the tools and technology that is out there that helps you in doing spend analysis. There are several tools out there, and predominantly the function and the logic behind all these tools is quite similar. Some of them are much more widely adopted, much more comprehensive than the others, but the universe of tools include Ariba and SAP. These two are the big two in spend analysis. You also have i2, Procurian, which was recently acquired by Accenture. You have Bravo Solutions, Zycus, and Smart by Global eProcure. And there are a lot more, but these are the top spend analysis tools. And their inherent logic and the way they adopt is the same. And what should you keep in mind as you're looking for tools in technology and spend analysis? One, what you buy should be able to handle multiple data sources. It can be from your general ledger, it can be from your accounts payable, it should be from your scanned PDF copies, it should be in the form of pictures. So most of these tools help you draw from disparate sources of data. Compatibility is another key. The tools should be compatible with multiple ERP systems. Customization, you don't want to fit a square peg in a round hole. So most of these tools are customizable. They should be customized to your particular industry, and they should also be customized to your goals and objectives. Visualization is key, and this is a key differentiator. As we talked about earlier, data arising out of spend analysis should be presented to you in a clear format that facilitates decision making and leads to sourcing projects. So there are presenting the data in various ways can make a world of difference for you in order to make decisions. Ultimately, the last aspect, and this is common across most modern tools, is data should be on the cloud. This is true especially for not just large, but also medium to large companies that want their data in their particular cloud. And this will make sure that you have access to your data at all times. Some of the considerations that you choose to help you choose the right technology is cost, implementation complexity, integration, and automation. So enterprise tools that we talked about earlier, they are really effective for medium and medium to large corporations because they are pretty expensive. Smaller and small medium organizations don't see the return on investment in using tools such as Ariba and SAP. While the cost is important, it's pretty high, the implementation complexity is also significant. It would take years for you to implement proper spend analysis. I wouldn't say years, but perhaps close to a year, if not more, in order to make sure you have an efficient spend management program. What is time consuming is connecting all the data sources to your tool, making sure there is integration and there is a lot of supplier normalization, cleansing, and so on. So implementation can be pretty complex. Vertical integration is also key because once you use multiple tools to do different things within your supply management, all these tools need to speak to each other to make sure you as a procurement professional don't waste a lot of time in manually integrating these tools. And that again leads to perfect automation because still there is a lot of manual intervention the way we use spend analysis tools. So we will have inputs from the spend analysis tools, but still what we do is we take it into an Excel and we still do an additional round of slicing and dicing and rework the data. So there is still a lot of manual intervention, and hence for most small, medium organization, a service-based approach to spend analysis works best. This is where companies come in and they will do all these. So they're pretty efficient in doing all this. They have templates, they have framework setup. So they will come in and they will present. They will do all this in the back end and present only the visualizations to you. So with that, we have come to the end of this session. I will quickly run through what we saw about spend analysis. We talked about the various types of spend, direct, indirect, and tail spend, the distinction between the three. We talked about disparate sources of data. We talked about what type of data are absolute must in order for you to perform an efficient spend management program, what types of data are nice to have. We also talked about UNSPSC codes and Christian's immense help to the procurement professionals across the world. We talked about the various benefits of spend analysis. We talked about the process where you start with your AP data, you extract, cleanse, and enrich the data. You classify them into buckets and ultimately use data and present it in a format that drives decisions using dashboards, charts, reports, and more. And we talked about the spend cube. The organizations should strive to understand what they're buying, from who they're buying, and for who they're buying. So the answer to these three questions together will help them form the spend cube or try to understand their total spend. And we also looked at a few common types of analysis that were done. We talked about unit cost as well. We talked about contract compliance and extension of spend analysis, as well as tracking the savings that you generate. We discussed briefly about the various tools that are out there and what are the key criteria that you should use while you select a tool. With that, I conclude my presentation. If you have any doubts, you are free to contact me at ram@bcubeglobal.com. That's ram@bcubeglobal.com. And also take a look at our website, bcubeglobal.com. And if you have any questions, you feel free to call me also over the phone. My number is 9500017385.